The morning sun had just begun its slow climb over the edge of the city when Maurice Bennett unlocked the side entrance of Shirley's diner, his apron slung over his shoulder and a steaming travel mug of black coffee in his hand. The hinges squeaked the way they always did, a sharp metallic protest that reminded him, strangely, of jazz horns on a late summer night. The scent of yesterday's bacon still clung to the walls, mingling with the faint, almost ghostly smell of maple syrup. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home. At least, the closest thing Maurice had known to one for the last 15 years. He moved like a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. Coffee brewed, griddle heated, chairs unstacked, napkins folded, silverware set just so beside cracked menus laminated sometime in the mid-90s. The jukebox in the corner, still refusing to play track 7, hummed faintly as he gave it his daily pat on the side, a ritual as pointless as it was comforting. Maurice had been a waiter here since he was 24. Now he was 45, with laugh lines around his eyes and calluses on his palms, but there was a certain grace in the way he moved between the booths, the way he could balance 3 full plates on one arm while topping off a regular's coffee with the other, never spilling a drop. He'd never been to college. He'd never owned property. He didn't drive a new car. But somehow, Maurice had made peace with the quiet life of service, because inside this diner, he mattered. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough. But that winter morning, long before the first customer walked in, something stirred in the back of his mind. A memory. A face. 2 of them, actually. It had been over 20 years ago. The night had been brutal. One of those raw January evenings where the wind cuts through your jacket like you're not even wearing one. Maurice was closing solo, the floor half mopped, the coffee pot scrubbing itself dry when the door chimed and a gust of freezing air hit him like a slap. And there they were. 2 kids, maybe 8 or 9, skin too pale from cold, eyes wide, clothes thin, soaked through. No coats, no gloves, just each other. They didn't say a word, just stood there, blinking, like maybe if they stared long enough, the smell of fries and warmth would wrap around them and make them real again. Maurice hadn't asked questions. He hadn't called the cops, hadn't demanded money, hadn't even hesitated. He just pointed to the booth nearest the heater, grabbed 2 bowls, and filled them with the thickest chili he had left. Threw in cheese, crushed crackers over the top, brought out hot chocolate with real whipped cream, not that pressurized stuff from a can. Eat slow, he'd said, crouching beside the table. Let your stomach catch up to your hunger. The girl nodded. The boy just stared at him with something that might have been awe or fear or both. Afterward, they tried to thank him, said their names, Caleb and Willa, and before he could press for more, they vanished into the night, their shapes swallowed by the alley behind the diner. Maurice had watched them go with a heaviness in his chest. He never saw them again. Until now. Earth to Maurice came a voice. He blinked and turned to see Charlene, the morning cook, peeking out from the swinging door behind the counter. Her gray hair was pulled into a bun, her glasses fogged from the kitchen steam. You've been staring at that window like it owes you money. Maurice chuckled softly, just remembering something. Long time ago. Was it a woman? He smiled. No, but close. She laughed, loud and unfiltered. Then it must be good. The morning rush came and went in its usual rhythm. Truck drivers with endless appetites, nurses on split shifts, a high school teacher grading essays between bites of rye toast. Maurice handled it all like a conductor at a quiet symphony. Every refill, every smile, every more syrup, Han, delivered with the kind of smooth charm that only years of repetition could perfect. But as the day wore on, something kept tugging at him. A whisper from the past. 2 hungry faces. The weight of a gesture he had almost forgotten. And then, just before the lunch crowd hit, the phone rang. Shirley's, he answered. You're speaking with Maurice. There was a pause. Then a crisp voice said, Mr. Maurice Bennett. Speaking. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Caleb Foster. He's requested a private delivery for this evening. He'll cover all expenses, of course. Maurice blinked. I'm sorry, who? The voice continued, unfazed. Mr. Foster would like to remain discreet for now, but he did say this. Tell Maurice it's time to return the favor. Maurice's stomach dropped. It couldn't be. He hadn't heard that name in 2 decades. Okay, he said slowly. Where's the delivery going? The woman hesitated. To you. He's sending it to your house. Morris's mouth went dry. My house? Yes, sir. He said you'll know what to do when it arrives. Before he could respond, the line disconnected. He stood still for a long time, phone still in hand, Charlene watching him with a puzzled frown from behind the grill. What was that about? Maurice shook his head, heart pounding in his chest. I'm not sure yet. But he had a feeling the past wasn't done with him. Not yet. That night, just as the sun dipped low over the rooftops and painted the sky with streaks of rust and lilac, Maurice stood outside his modest home on the east side of town, a weathered little place with chipped paint and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. Then he heard it, a distant whomp 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 sound, growing louder. The wind kicked up dust from the sidewalk. Neighbors peeked through curtains. And then, a sleek, black helicopter descended from the sky, its searchlight illuminating Morris's entire yard in a holy white glow. The rotor blades roared as it touched down gently in the street, and before Maurice could take a step forward, the door opened. And out stepped a man, sharp suit, confident stride, eyes that hadn't forgotten. Mr. Bennett, the man said, smiling. Maurice blinked. Caleb. He nodded once, eyes shining. You fed me once, when no one else would. Now it's time I do the same. Maurice took a slow step forward, overwhelmed, every cell in his body vibrating with disbelief. Why now? Caleb grinned. Because today, you're coming with me. Maurice had never set foot in a helicopter before. Not even at one of those county fairs where they offered 5-minute loops for tourists with too much time and not enough sense. And now here he was, buckled into buttery leather seats, headset pressed to his ears, city lights stretching below like a living map of all the years he'd spent quietly giving pieces of himself away. The interior of the aircraft hummed with elegance, wood panel accents, dim amber lights along the ceiling, even a tray of chilled, sparkling water resting between him and the sharply dressed man who hadn't stopped smiling since they took off. Caleb Foster, once a silent, shivering boy in an oversized hoodie, now looked like he'd stepped out of a business magazine cover. His navy three-piece suit fit like it was sewn directly onto his frame, but it wasn't the clothes that struck Maurice most. It was the stillness in Caleb's eyes. The kind you only see in people who've endured something and come out the other side with purpose. Maurice couldn't stop staring. You're really him? He said finally, over the thrum of the rotors. Caleb turned, his smile softening. It's been a long road, but yes, that's me. You were just kids. You and your sister. I barely did anything. You saved our lives, Caleb said simply, and we never forgot. Maurice looked down at his hands, rough, calloused, still stained faintly with the scent of dish soap and fryer grease. I never expected anything from that. Just couldn't let 2 kids go hungry. And that, Caleb replied, is exactly why I'm here. The helicopter began its descent, and through the glass, Maurice saw it, a sprawling estate on the edge of the city, modern in design, but warm in its lines. Stone, glass, timber beams. A curved driveway lined with lanterns. Gardens in full bloom despite the chill. And, in the center of it all, a massive roundabout where staff in black uniforms waited, standing at perfect attention. Maurice exhaled sharply. You live here. Not just me, Caleb said. My sister too. She's waiting for you. The moment Maurice stepped onto the circular drive, Willow was already hurrying down the steps of the main house, her arms wide, laughter bubbling from her throat before she even reached him. He hadn't seen her in 20 years, and yet it was her. Older, taller, with sharp cheekbones and bold lipstick, but the same eyes. Eyes that had once scanned the corners of a diner for safety, now radiant with warmth. "Maurice," she cried, enveloping him in a hug so tight he could barely breathe. He chuckled into her shoulder. "You sure this isn't some dream I'm having while refilling ketchup bottles?" She stepped back, hands still on his arms. "Oh, it's real. And this is just the beginning." That evening, Maurice sat at a table longer than any he'd ever served, beneath a crystal chandelier that looked like it cost more than his entire house. But it wasn't the extravagance that made him nervous. It was the story. The story Caleb and Willa slowly began to unravel between bites of lemon-roasted chicken and warm cornbread. After that night at the diner, they'd wandered for 3 more days before someone finally called Child Protective Services. They spent years bouncing between shelters and foster homes, but something had shifted that night. Something small, invisible, but permanent. "You were the first person," Caleb said, "who looked at us like we mattered." Willa nodded. Not like a problem, not like a pity case, just like two kids who needed warmth. Morris's eyes stung. "I didn't know if you made it. I used to think about you sometimes. Wonder where you ended up." "We made it," Caleb said. "Barely, but we did." He explained how he'd gotten a scholarship through a social worker's recommendation, eventually earning a degree in engineering. Willa, meanwhile, pursued fashion design, started selling her creations online, then to boutiques, and eventually opened her own label. Together, they pooled their earnings to invest in real estate. One smart deal led to another, then tech, then international ventures. And now, Caleb said, "We're here, and you're here with us." Maurice looked down at the linen napkin in his lap, quiet. "You didn't know me anything, you know." "That's where you're wrong," Willa said. "Because while the world passed us by, you chose to see us. You chose to feed us. And when you've lived through abandonment, choice means everything." Caleb leaned in. "We're building something, Maurice. A network. A foundation. Not charity. Opportunity. And we want you to help us run it." Maurice blinked. "Me? You know what it means to give with no expectations. To serve with dignity. That's the heart of what we're building. And we need someone who understands that better than anyone." Maurice let the words settle around him like snow. After a long pause, he said, "But I've never done anything like that before." Willa smiled. "Neither had we. Until we did." Later that night, after the house had gone quiet and the fire pit crackled outside under a moonlit sky, Maurice stood alone on the balcony, nursing a cup of chamomile tea. His phone buzzed. "Charlene." He answered, and her voice came through half suspicious, half concerned. "You alive, old man?" He laughed. "More than ever." "So what the heck happened? Did he rob you?" Maurice looked up at the stars, voice steady. "He gave me a second chance." The next morning, the scent of citrus and clean linen filled Morris's guest suite, the kind of luxury smell that only came from places where the windows stayed spotless and the rugs were imported. Sunlight spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows framed by heavy oak drapes, illuminating sleek furniture and a quiet harmony of whites, creams, and warm browns. Maurice sat at the edge of the bed in a robe that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, staring at the soft slippers they'd left beside him. He still wasn't sure if he should put them on or leave them untouched. Downstairs, Willow was already sipping espresso at the long marble kitchen island, her tablet open, sketching new designs with the smooth precision of someone who had been building her vision for years. Caleb was outside on a call, pacing near the koi pond behind the house, his voice calm, assured, fluent in the language of deals and capital and teams in Singapore. And Maurice. Maurice was still trying to make sense of it all. Willa looked up as he entered, her face brightening. Sleep okay? I did, he said, his voice thick with disbelief, though I half expected to wake up back in my twin bed with my knees touching the wall. She laughed gently and patted the stool next to her. Well, here, the only thing that touches your knees is cashmere. Maurice eased himself onto the stool. I'm still not sure why you brought me here. Willis set the tablet aside. Because this isn't just about repaying a debt. It's about building something that remembers its roots. He tilted his head. You said that last night. What does it actually mean? Caleb, entering from the back patio in a crisp cream sweater and jeans, answered for her. It means we're starting a foundation. It's called the Table Project. Maurice raised an eyebrow. We want to identify people, just like you, who served quietly, generously, but never got recognition, Caleb explained. Teachers, janitors, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, folks who shaped lives without ever being seen by the systems that matter. We're building a network of them, Willa added. A digital archive, local resource hubs, stipends, and even a storytelling platform where others can share how these everyday heroes shaped their lives. Maurice blinked. That's beautiful. And we want you to be the heart of it, Caleb said. Not just a name. In voice. You'll be the face of it. Maurice laughed awkwardly. Me? I'm not made for speeches and boardrooms. You don't need to be, Willis said. Just be you. That's what changed our lives. That's what will change others. The next few weeks unfolded like a dream. They flew him to Los Angeles to meet with documentary producers who wanted to capture the origin story of the Table Project. They took him to Atlanta to sit down with civil rights educators who wanted to partner. They brought him to a high school in Detroit where a janitor named Mr. Donald had been secretly mentoring kids in math for over a decade, on his own time, unpaid, unrecognized. Maurice listened to these people the way he once listened to truckers at the counter of Shirley's Diner. He didn't talk over them. He didn't make himself the center. He just nodded, asked good questions, and let them shine. And slowly, the foundation began to bloom. One night, after a whirlwind week of travel, Maurice sat again on the back patio of the estate, a thin blanket wrapped around his shoulders, watching the koi ripple beneath the moonlight. Willa joined him with 2 glasses of hibiscus tea. You look like someone who just saw the future, she said. He chuckled. I'm not sure if I saw it or if I walked straight into it. She handed him the glass. You belong in it. He shook his head, gently. You know, for the longest time, I thought life was something that just happened. Like a meal you didn't order, but had to eat anyway. But this feels like something I didn't even dare to want. Willa leaned back in her chair. Maybe that's why it found you. Then, something unexpected happened. The New York Sentinel, a major national newspaper, published a front-page piece titled, The Waiter Who Fed the Future. It was a sweeping profile on Maurice Bennett and the Table Project, tracing the diner moment, the helicopter arrival, and the nationwide response that followed. The story went viral. Millions watched the accompanying video, where Maurice spoke, softly and humbly, about what it meant to feed someone when you have little, and how dignity is never too expensive to give. Donations flooded in. Schools began teaching the Table Project model in civic courses. Celebrities tweeted about it. Mayors called. Even Congress issued a formal recognition. And yet, in the midst of all the light and applause, Maurice found himself afraid. He didn't know how to live as someone seen. He didn't know how to wear praise like a comfortable coat. One morning, as the staff prepared for a gala that would officially launch the foundation on a national stage, Caleb found Maurice sitting alone on the steps of the grand ballroom. You okay? He asked, voice low. Maurice nodded. I think so. You don't look it. Maurice paused, choosing his words carefully. What if I mess this up? What if the spotlight finds something in me that's not good enough? Caleb sat beside him. Then you do what you've always done. You feed the world anyway, even if your hands shake. Maurice looked over. Why me, Caleb? After all these years. Caleb didn't hesitate. Because you didn't wait for the world to change to be kind. You were kind despite it. The gala was set for Saturday. But something happened the night before. Morris's old boss from Shirley's Diner, Mr. Langley, showed up at the estate. Not with the camera crew. Not for recognition. Just for Maurice. I saw the story, Langley said, holding out a trembling hand. I just came to say thank you. For sticking around all those years. For feeding more than just the customers. Maurice hugged him tight. And in that moment, he understood something. Kindness doesn't always echo right away. But when it comes back, it moves mountains. The morning of the gala, a pale pink sky stretched above the city like silk pulled taut, streaked with soft clouds that caught the first blush of dawn. Inside the estate's ballroom, dozens of staff moved in coordinated silence. Floral designers adding final touches of white orchids to each crystal centerpiece. Lighting technicians testing spotlights that shimmered like stars against velvet drapes. And chefs whispering over tables of canapes that looked too elegant to eat. Maurice stood in the center of it all, dressed in a deep charcoal suit that fit him like memory. Tailored, but not flashy. Polished, but still him. His tie was slightly askew. And despite the makeup artist's best efforts, the creases under his eyes and the soft texture of his hands refused to disappear. He wasn't trying to look like a billionaire. He was trying to look like Maurice. And that was enough. In the hours leading up to the gala, reporters began arriving. Not the predatory kind who hunted headlines for drama, but the curious, respectful ones. The kind who spoke in thoughtful tones and asked questions that actually required reflection. One woman from PBS leaned in after her interview and said, I think people needed this story. Something real. Something decent. Maurice smiled modestly. I think we've had decent all along. We just forgot where to look. The red carpet was brief, Maurice insisted. He didn't want the night to feel like celebrity. He wanted it to feel like community. And so, at 6 p.m., the doors opened, not just to donors and dignitaries, but to teachers, sanitation workers, single moms, school librarians, crossing guards, and cafe servers, invited guests of honor, all of whom had been nominated by their communities to be recognized for acts of quiet, consistent care. Each wore a name tag not of their title, but of the people they'd helped. Mrs. Carver helped me read at 7. Coach Elroy saved my life after practice. Miss Torres brought me food when Dad was sick. And Maurice, standing before them on stage, knew he was not their leader. He was simply their mirror. When it came time for the main address, the room fell into a hush. Caleb introduced him as the man who changed our lives without needing a reason to. And as Maurice stepped into the soft light of the stage, there was no applause. Not yet. Just stillness. The kind reserved for chapels and heartbeats. He began slowly. I was just a waiter. That's what I used to say. A soft murmur. But it turns out, there's no such thing as just a waiter. Or just a teacher. Or just a janitor. What we do in quiet corners still echoes. Sometimes not for years. Sometimes not even in ways we get to see. But it matters. Every plate served. Every kind word. Every warm glance in a cold room. He looked over at Caleb and Willa seated near the front, their eyes locked on his, proud and reverent. 20 years ago, I fed 2 kids on a snowy night. They disappeared before I knew their last names. But the thing about giving without expectation is that sometimes what you get back isn't just a thank you, it's a revolution. Now the applause came. Not thunderous, not wild, just steady, like rain hitting the roof of a home you love. The sound of people recognizing something they'd always hoped was true. That kindness matters. That someone sees them. After the ceremony, Maurice walked through the crowd, receiving hugs, handshakes, tearful thanks from people who said things like, "You reminded me I matter," and "I almost quit teaching last year." Now I know I won't. But one person stopped him dead in his tracks. A boy, maybe 15, stood nervously near the back of the hall, a plate of untouched hors d'oeuvres shaking in his hand. Sir, he said. Maurice smiled. Hey there. I, I wanted to say something. Go on. My mom's one of the people you honored tonight. She works at a laundromat. I used to be embarrassed about that. But now, I'm not. Morris's heart caught. She always says kindness is like folding sheets. Nobody notices when it's done, but everybody feels the difference. He laughed, soft and true. Your mom's a wise woman. The boy nodded. I'm going to start being proud of her. Out loud. Later that night, as the ballroom emptied and the moon rose higher above the city, Maurice stood again on the balcony of the estate, the lights below flickering like fireflies in the dark. Willa came out beside him, glass of champagne in one hand, phone in the other. You're trending on every platform, by the way. He groaned. Don't tell me that. She laughed. Well, you are. But not just your speech. People are sharing their own Maurice moments. Thousands of them. Hashtags blowing up. He shook his head. It's not about me. It started with you, she corrected, but now it's about us. All of us. He looked at her, the little girl who once shivered in his booth now standing tall beside him, a woman who had built an empire with her brother and returned to honor the man who gave them their first full meal in days. What do we do next? He asked. She grinned. We feed the world. And far away, in a small diner on the edge of town, Charlene wiped down the counter and turned up the volume on the old TV in the corner. Morris's face appeared, beaming, framed by a cheerin that read, "The waiter who fed a generation." She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. Took you long enough, Bennett, she whispered. But you finally got your tip. It was early spring when the first table center officially opened, right in the heart of Morris's old neighborhood, in the same block where he used to buy day-old bread and discounted socks from corner shops with flickering lights. But now the space had been transformed. Glass walls, natural wood beams, green gardens, and murals of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Inside, it wasn't a typical nonprofit office. There were storytelling booths where elders could record their stories, soundproof rooms for kids to do interviews with mentors, a cafe run by former waitstaff and janitors turned culinary guides, a digital wall that projected faces of silent heroes submitted from around the world. The vibe wasn't charity. It was honor. It was home. And Maurice stood at the center of it all, wearing the same soft smile that he wore the day two kids in rags had found him 20 years earlier. He hadn't changed much in spirit. Still humble. Still listening more than talking. But now people stopped him in the street, not for autographs, but for hugs. For thanks. For the chance to say, I used to think no one saw people like us. Until I saw you. That night, after the ribbon cutting, Maurice returned home. Yes, still his modest home, which he'd refused to trade for a mansion, despite Caleb and Willa's persistent offers. I don't need more space, he told them once. I need more meaning. He stepped out onto his small front porch, the wood beneath his feet now fixed, the door freshly painted. The moon was full again, almost like the night the helicopter had first descended. But this time, the sky remained quiet. No engines. No drama. Just stillness. Until he heard something unexpected. A knock. He opened the door slowly. And there, on his stoop, were two kids. A girl and a boy. Shoes torn. Hair messy. Eyes too big for their tiny frames. He didn't hesitate. Come in, he said. They sat at his little table. He made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Gave them water. Pulled out two fresh apples. Lit a candle, not for the ambience, but for the memory. The girl looked up and asked, Why are you helping us? Maurice leaned back, eyes soft. Because someone once needed to. And because I can. Across town, Willa and Caleb were finalizing plans to launch table centers in Detroit, Philadelphia, and New Orleans. Donations had tripled. A university had offered Maurice an honorary doctorate. There were talks of a book, even a documentary. But Maurice stayed grounded, always returning to one truth. Dignity doesn't require wealth. Kindness isn't expensive. And sometimes, the smallest gestures outlive us in the largest ways. On the anniversary of the day the helicopter landed in front of his house, Maurice stood again on his porch. This time not alone. Charlene, now retired, sat beside him with a glass of sweet tea. Willa and Caleb were there too, both leaning on the porch railing, watching as a new plaque was unveiled at the sidewalk. The table starts here, in honor of Maurice Bennett, who showed the world that feeding a soul is more powerful than feeding ambition. A group of kids from the local school clapped. One shouted, "Mr. Maurice, you're famous." He laughed. "Famous ain't the goal, kid, but being useful, that'll do." And as the sun dipped below the edge of the neighborhood, painting everything in hues of gold and lavender, Maurice knew one thing with perfect clarity. He hadn't just fed two children. He had started a movement.